Thanks very much, and thanks for having me here tonight. I think what I'm struck by most, I was just saying to Amol, one of the things that struck me most from the films is that most of the ways in which certainly my daily grind of human rights work at the State Department would have relevance for these stories is kind of one step removed in terms of the governance challenges that are behind many of the stories. I was writing down each of the countries and situations as I was listening, and I was thinking which one of these is the most hopeful to me, or the one that is least overwhelming, because the problems all seem so interlocked and intertwined. And it was the Ghanaian story that seemed the least overwhelming. And one of the things about that story is that you had a lot of interviews with civil society actors who are clearly participating in a conversation there and aware of the issues and being able and feeling comfortable being on film and highlighting them, and B, that the extractive industry that's going on there is formalized and entails large corporations, and so you could very easily kind of chart out a solution that could be proposed, that could be adopted, a regulatory fix, et cetera, or a conversation to be had between the civil society actors and the company that would be promising. The others all focused on more informal extractive industries, except I guess Sarawak, but raised much more complicated challenges, I think. And it's striking that 3 of the 5 were about gold, and one wonders what the stories will be 5 years from now if the relative price of gold has gone down by 86% instead of gone up 6-fold as it has in the last decade, because that will also have an impact on all of these communities in a different way, and those changes will be will represent a different set of shocks. I think I'm struggling to comment on each particular one because the governance challenges that underlie it, it's not clear to me, for example, in the Peruvian case that we just saw, that it's a lack of will necessarily that keeps the government from effectively enforcing rule of law and protections for the environment, so much as not having an immense territory, and governance is a real challenge, and policing is a real challenge, and when you have to manage both policing and also not having drawn up the mapping and all of the kind of fact base that you need in order to effectively govern a territory like that, how do you do that and keep up with the rapidly escalating price of gold and the rush that's going on? And certainly, in our own country, gold rushes, when they happened, presented similar environmental and social challenges to the ones that we saw, and for some similar governance challenge reasons. So I don't know. I think what will be interesting in the course of the discussion is to bring out the ways that the various the environmental connects to the social, connects to the law and order problems that we saw interlocking in those examples in particular. I think I'm going to stop there because I'd rather go to specifics in Q&A.
Amol, Mehra.
Sure, thank you. So first I want to recognize the filmmakers. I mean, I think this was an excellent articulation of really contemporary business and human rights problems. In my day-to-day, I work on business and human rights issues exclusively, and there's some interesting tools in our accountability tool belt that have been developed that I think could be relevant to some of the situations presented in these films, both of which sprung up recently in the Dodd-Frank Act that was passed in 2010. So I'm going to give you a little update about legislation on conflict minerals from the Congo. So this is tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold from the Congo, as well as a brief overview of another provision of Dodd-Frank which deals with extractive industries transparency. And I think these types of disclosure tools are really effective in shedding light on on corporate involvement in human rights and environmental harms. And I think we as creative advocates and as citizens who believe that companies have an obligation to respect human rights, we need to be looking at these sorts of tools as a way to move forward on a host of the issues, including some of the ones presented above. So first, let me step it back and talk about Dodd-Frank and where these provisions came from. So when Dodd-Frank was passed, there were two provisions inserted at the end in the miscellaneous section of the bill. These are Section 1502 and Section 1504. Section 1502 deals with minerals that fuel conflict from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Congo has been suffering some of the worst human rights abuses in history. It is estimated that over 5 million people have died and over 40 women are raped daily. And much of the conflict is tied to the sourcing of minerals and the control that armed groups exert over these mining sites in the eastern part of the country. What that led to was some anger and some tension within the consumer advocacy groups here in the US, looking for a solution that we could push in our context to help shed light on this trade of minerals in the Congo. So this became Section 1502 of the Dodd-Frank Act, and essentially it requires companies who are sourcing minerals from the Congo and surrounding areas to conduct due diligence, supply chain due diligence, to identify the mines that they're sourcing these minerals from. And if they are sourcing from sites that are controlled by armed groups, they must disclose this to the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is sort of the body here in our government that regulates public companies. So this provision was passed, and it's now in the implementation phase, which, as Dan knows, is quite an exciting battle that's ongoing right now. But it's a really important one because what it does is it enables consumers, investors, and advocates to get meaningful information about company practices, about what companies are doing, who they're sourcing from, and how they are contributing or not to addressing the conflict in the Congo. Another provision I want to talk about is Section 1504, which is a publish what you pay law. Now, publish what you pay laws generally are structured to give transparency on payments by extractive issuers, so public companies that are extractives companies, oil, gas, and mining, and the payments that they're making to foreign governments. Now, how this law functions is just that. So if you're a US issuer, you must disclose to the SEC the payments that you're making on a project-by-project basis to foreign governments. So what this does is gives us information, again, that we can use to define or to make a determination of whether companies are harming or hurting the development in countries around the world. I think these are both interesting provisions, and what we're seeing is that they're being replicated in jurisdictions across the world. In Europe, they're looking, I believe legislation similar to Publish What You Pay has been introduced, but it also includes forestry. So, we're seeing disclosure as this really valuable tool to get meaningful information and to really address human and environmental rights that are violated by corporate activity. Those are my sort of baseline remarks, and again, eager to have a discussion about this all.
Well, it's interesting to bring up the situation in the Congo and Dodd-Frank because the intent is very good, but there are lots and lots of challenges in the implementation as you all are dealing with. And some of you may have seen there was a very rather distressing story in I think the New York Times this week on the status of this and the myriad difficulties of making this law work in practice in a situation like Eastern Congo, where you've got literally thousands of subcontractors and suppliers, and you begin with sort of talking about we're going to make Apple perform or we're going to make large corporations perform, but very quickly you get into situations such as Nadja and Steve were showing in Peru and Colombia, where you're talking about maybe a single militia or a single artisanal miner who is producing the stuff, and how do you translate that into effective law and true transparency? But I hope we can come back to that in the question. But go ahead.
The challenge is even greater when you think of it with gold versus tantalum. Gold is so much more broadly available. It's so much harder to the uses of it. Obviously, it's not an industrial limited to an industrial use, et cetera. And so the challenges of trying to apply similar, all the difficulties of Dodd-Frank notwithstanding, the challenges of trying to take that experiment in kind of transnational governance and apply it to something like gold, which the three of the 5 cases would be enormous, yeah.
Right, well, I guess I'll ask Steve and Nadja, because one of the questions here is thinking about this issue as a filmmaker or journalist, you're going on and doing the issue, how much, when you're looking at the issues, how much of an answer is is our government? I mean, as you're looking at Peru, what do you see as a role for an organization like Dan's Bureau, and then the work that you do with advocacy organizations? So as you shape the story, how do those other players inform and help in the telling of the story?
Well, I mean, a lot of the mercury that gets used in the gold mining process is mercury that comes from industries here in the U.S. and is shipped to Peru and to places in South America. So it's been used in our industries, and I think they recycle it, and then it's sent down there repackaged. We're not the sole provider. There are other countries involved as well. But there are certain things, I guess, that could be done maybe to support the Peruvian government. They're completely outmanned and sort of outgunned. Possibly even could use some technological support to help identify where the gold mining's happening. I know there's a couple groups, I believe, that are already doing, I think they're nonprofit groups, but they're doing surveillance photographs and doing some really great work of helping to identify these vast areas of the Amazon that are being subjected to this illegal gold mining and also logging that's happening in the region. So maybe there's some more support in that area that could happen.
The only thing that I would really add to Steve's comments is, I mean, I think that in Colombia, the situation is such that the Colombian government is in a real bind right now because they gave out almost 10,000 mining titles in the time span of about 8 years. The titles cover basically the size of South Carolina. So that's a really, really huge area, and as was mentioned in the slideshow, a lot of those areas overlap where traditional miners have been working for a long time. So the process was just so rapid in which they tried to make mining a cornerstone of their economy. And so now they're dealing with angry mining companies that say, we've got the title, but there's all these traditional miners on this land, they've got to get off, and they're dealing with their own citizens, traditional miners who are saying, we're not going to leave. So that's really something that I think is going to be a huge challenge for the Colombian government to try to sort through now. But one of the kind of, I think, interesting legal routes that some of these communities can take has been used by the community, featured in the slideshow La Toma, where they basically sued the Colombian government they accused them of violating their right to prior consultation. In Colombia, Indigenous groups and Afro-Colombian communities do have the right to be consulted on infrastructure projects as well as mining and oil and gas projects. And that has been violated across the country, but this one tiny community actually took their case to the Constitutional Court, and the court ruled in favor of the community and ordered that the government suspend mining titles in that area. That happened over a year ago. Consultation hasn't happened yet. But when you think about that one tiny community in an isolated part of Colombia, how did they get this case to the Constitutional Court? They worked in tandem with a lot of Colombian environmental as well as human rights groups and international human rights groups who worked with them to help them on the court case. So that's just an example, I think, of another interesting route to take.